This video describes some great features I've added to the X entity, the virtual entity I introduced in the last video. Within its simulated environment, the entity now has senses of touch, smell, and vision. I've added a few basic behaviors and goals to give the entity something to do, and more importantly, I've added an internal mental model which integrates the senses. We'll go through these new abilities in a bit more detail, starting with touch. With a touch sense, the entity can blindly feel its way through its environment. I made two sensors which extend a bit from the entity, so you can think of these either as antennae or arms, depending on whether you want to think of the entity as more like an insect or a robot. Each antenna can sense contact, the angle of the object it touches, whether it's at the end of an object, and whatever other senses we might subsequently add, like aroma or temperature. Interestingly, in order to make the best use of touch information, the entity needs to know the positions of the antenna tips relative to itself. And we might think of this as the beginning of your sense of proprioception, your internal sense of your own body's position. You can see on the entity an arc of dots which are colored to match the color that the entity sees in that particular direction. You can see that as the entity rotates, the colored dots on the retina change. We live in a three-dimensional world and have a two-dimensional retina. I previously created 2D vision modules, but this entity lives in a 2D world, and so it needed a one-dimensional retina. This single row of brain simulator neurons corresponds to retinal cells and have a value colored to match the field of view. The number of retinal cells is completely arbitrary, and I'm using a small number here so they will show better in this video. We just need to think of the entity today as having very poor vision. There isn't much downstream processing, so it can see colors in a specific direction, but that's about all. In the future, I should be able to improve its vision, perhaps with two eyes to give it some depth perception. With sensory input from multiple senses, I added a module which combines them. When the entity encounters objects, it adds them to its mental model of its surroundings. Within the model, color data comes from vision and position information comes from touch. The model is built from the point of view of the entity. Every object position is described in terms of a direction and a distance. Just like when you close your eyes and are still aware of the things around you, you think of them in terms of how far they are away and in what direction. In this display of the internal model, the entity is at the center and is facing upward. As the entity moves through its environment, the model is continuously adjusted. All of the objects are translated and rotated so as to maintain consistency. I added some behavior so the entity can find all the objects in its environments far more efficiently than it could before, including the ability to turn toward any object that it sees but is not currently in the model. In the overall AGI model, the only completely absent module is planning. And I'll add a module for that in the next few weeks. Given the mental model, I can add planning, imagination, or forethought by manipulating the model to consider what if. Then I can reattach the speech recognition, speech output, and knowledge base modules, and many more interesting behaviors will become possible. Keep in mind that my development strategy is to create at least a single use case for an end-to-end AGI model and build from there. Right now, the entity only knows about one kind of object with just a few attributes. After expanding this set, I'll upgrade the entity to learn about new object types and attributes on its own. It should be exciting, and I'm getting closer to the time when the software can be shared. I hope you'll stay tuned for future videos on this channel to watch how the X entity development progresses. For more on this timely topic, read my new book, Will Computers Revolt? Preparing for the Future of Artificial Intelligence. Available now at Amazon and book retailers worldwide in paperback, hardcover, and ebook editions.